What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Twink Revolution. I'm Sam.
And I'm Gian.
So Gian sounds like shit because he's not feeling well.
Yeah, I'm sick and I'm dying. Not sick in the sort of like metaphorical sense of being sick of capitalism or anything. I mean physically ill.
Yeah.
It fucking sucks.
It's okay, he has a hot toddy, so don't feel too bad for him.
Yeah, it's actually kind of really, it's worth getting sick actually just because I get to drink hot toddies in the middle of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What have you been doing, Sam? I haven't connected with the world in days.
Yeah.
Please tell me stories of the outside world. What is happening?
Well, besides getting my mouth drilled by the dentist,
Oh, wow.
I've been using TikTok and shit and noticed more and more presidential candidates and congressional candidates for political office have been making TikTok videos, and it's the cringiest shit online.
Yeah, aside from a few like notable examples, I've always said one of the nice things about supporting Bernie Sanders in this campaign is that I don't have to apologize for a lot of like campaign cringe.
Mm-hmm.
But the only one of the TikTok ones I think I've seen is the Julian Castro and his brother being cringe on TikTok. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
It's the whole like I'm you, I'm me.
Yeah, it's basically, it's like this, yeah. And then there was an Andrew Yang one where it was like, still pulling at 3%, and then they played the song, we're like, we did it, yeah. And it's
Is
like,
he even polling at 3% these days? I think it's like 0 in most
probably.
electorates.
But I'm just like, why are you cheering? That's an awful poll right now. Drop out. Like,
I think it's the Washington Post have been pushing a lot of these.
yeah,
right?
those two are Washington Post. There is a Robert O'Rourke one as well, but I can't remember what it was.
Like, thankfully, we don't have to care about him anymore until he turns out as a lobbyist for Goldman Sachs.
Out, right?
He dropped the fuck out. Thank God for that. The only good thing he's ever done is riding off into the sunset on that stupid fucking skateboard of his.
But there was also this Congress candidate from Washington, and he goes like Joshua for Congress, but his full name is Joshua Collins, and
was the click in there? Is that that's actually part of his name?
Yeah,
Joshua
that's part of it.
Collins. Right.
But I thought it was funny because he's much younger than most of the candidates. He's 26, I believe. His videos are still like cringe. Like, I don't think political campaigns should ever have a TikTok. It should be banned federally. But
that's my platform for
he titled one of them like, I'm the furthest left federal candidate in U.S. history, and nothing really like seemed that to left that other people in history haven't said. It was like trans rights and like Medicare or the Green New Deal, and then his like only extreme one was like abolish the CIA. But I'm like, how are you gonna get that done? Like, Congress won't pass that.
Well, no, hey, I won't play into that one. I mean, abolish the CIA is a worthy goal. It's more like these are not left positions, right? You could be a far right fascist, and you could want to abolish the CIA for various reasons.
Totally.
Like, their death squad underperformance. Yeah. They're underperforming the death squad metrics in South America these days.
Yeah.
The training rates, the number of nuns burned per $100 billion spent, these important metrics the CIA used to track and used to excel at. They just haven't been doing as well these days. And so you could want to disestablish them for that reason.
Yeah, totally.
But I mean, it's not clear that's why he wants to.
But also this whole like, I'm further left than this person kind of narrative, just like, it's not really helpful.
Well, yes, I'm to the left of Bernie is the line that has driven me fucking insane for years.
Yeah, so they should all just delete the app and leave it to like the 14-year-olds who are like, I don't know what 14-year-olds do nowadays.
Well, they do TikTok, apparently.
I was going to say twerk, but I think it's a little too old for them, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's passé.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm out of touch with the youth. But speaking of electoral shit, San Francisco had some major victories this past week.
Yeah, so Chesa Boudin won the district attorney race. He's of course a pretty radical dude. I can't remember his exact. He worked as a public defender, I believe. He worked for Hugo Chavez for a while, I believe, as well, right?
He had something. He like translated some of his text and stuff like that, I believe.
Yeah. So anyway, he's pretty cool. His platform was a sort of genuine, like, let's not keep doing sort of liberal politics in San Francisco as it slides into the sea. So I think, he was endorsed by Bernie, and he was endorsed by various sort of criminal reform groups, and good. He seems solid. So anyway, he won. He won by not very much in a race where the San Francisco Police Union dumped something like $650,000 into this race.
It was crazy.
Against attack ads against him.
They were like, he's the choice of gang members and like criminals. And it's like.
And speaking as a criminal gang member, I did in fact choose him. So
wonderful.
They're correct in that regard.
Yeah, but he basically just wanted to like decarcerate the system and kind of replace a lot with like preventative measures and like mental health care and stuff.
And all left-wing crime is legal now, right?
Yeah, we can blow up everything that's
you can burn
capitalist.
Any cop car you see. Yeah, you can rob a bank.
It's the free as parents and Weather Underground.
Cool. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm down with this entire program.
Yeah.
So,
but he wasn't the only one that won.
Yeah, Dean Preston won in San Francisco's one of the city supervisor races.
Yeah, District 5.
Yep, and he was pretty cool. He was endorsed by the DSA.
Yeah, he's a democratic socialist.
Yep, I don't know a lot else about him except I sort of read his platform. It's not my district. People I know who have met him seem to think he's a pretty cool guy. So I wish him luck. I mean, honestly, anybody who's not going in as a sort of like Clintonite Democrat in like just machine politics in San Francisco these days is a breath of fresh air. So
yeah.
I'll take that, I could like give anybody else a shot at this point.
I mean, his platform was pretty cool. It was like make Muni 3 and like make like dental health care part of like the San Francisco health coverage, and make all public land be affordable housing when it's having housing built on it. So all good things you don't see from any of the other Democrats in San Francisco.
No, but I mean, haven't you heard that actually in this last, off-cycle election, the gays are going to save us all?
I did see it. There was a lot of clout around the whole, like, I don't know what number it is. I've seen 80, 120, 150. So who knows what number it is of elected candidates in the last Tuesday elections. And basically everyone was like, oh, this is amazing. We're making progress because we have so many LGBTQIA plus people. But no one was asking, what the fuck do these people believe? As if, like, right-wingers can't be, like, gay or lesbian or bi or trans. I mean, Pete Buttigieg is gay, and he's basically a Republican.
I mean, yeah, it's like all those wonderful white power LGBT members of the community who are winning election this time. They're going to be great. I just really look forward to the glorification of the white race they perform under the rainbow flag.
Yeah. It would just be hilarious if it actually was true. A fascist group of LGBT people. That'd be the way they would win, because no one would be like, oh, what are their policies? They'd be like, oh, we have 40 trans people running for Congress. This is amazing. And they'd all be like, white power.
Well, yeah, I mean, nobody will ever ask the question. They just engage in this kind of nonsense essentialism of like, all LGBT people have exactly the same politics.
Yeah.
And they all think the same way, and they can be treated as a single unit, which is pretty dumb. And that was actually the premise of that stupid, was it Now Next?
New Now Next, which is like Logos Media.
Yeah, that article they had. So they published this article, which was probably one of the stupidest pieces of political analysis I've ever read.
And so many,
Yeah, there are so many to choose from, but this was really bad. And this one was, the premise was that if every unregistered LGBT person voted, or registered, that they would defeat Trump.
Yes.
That this is, and the premise behind this was, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Seb, but I think I remember that they basically were showing like in some of these head-to-head races where Trump was beating the entire Democratic field.
Yeah.
That like, well, if you register them all, then Elizabeth Warren would only be like 3 points behind a statistical tie. The conclusion they were dancing around was actually like Bernie would win.
Yeah.
Like Bernie was already like likely to win a lot of these in a head-to-head with Trump. Biden might win some of them, you know, but they were like, yeah, you would almost get Elizabeth Warren. So
yeah,
I fucking hated this article so much.
Also, I saw so many like Bay Area libs sharing this article and being like, if these like backwards thinking like middle Americans like would just go out and vote, we wouldn't have this issue. It's basically like Hillary Clinton's the deplorables, and it really just is like this hyper focus on culture war shit that no one cares about, when it's really like they're voting because they want to make sure they have like a job, and anyone who says they're like just gonna save your job is like probably the candidate. Well, Hillary Clinton like represents all the things that have destroyed the working class in America for like the last 30 years.
I mean, I know I sound as sick as Hillary Clinton on a 9/11 Memorial Day, but I can't quite do the voice. But I mean, yeah, her whole America is already great thing is that was like the moment that election was just over.
It was it was so bad. But also it's like this idea that you can have a variance of viewpoints because of your identity, like to be like beyond just like the gay community, like the black community. There's like a growing like conservative black community, led by Candace Owens, social justice destroyer, and it's like everyone's like, oh, why would you do that? You're black. You should support a Democratic Party. But it's like, and she uses that as clout to like build up her like brand in like the conservative media, and the same thing for like any like LGBT person. It's like, oh, everyone thinks I should be this way because of something I have no control over, and it's like that's kind of bigoted in a way. Well,
yeah, that it is essentialism. I mean, or a centralizing of gay identity, which is dumb already, but it's also just politically naive.
Yeah,
I mean, it's there's particularly as the sort of some of these strict identity categories have started to break down, the significance of them for a lot of people is decaying over time, right? It's just less important. People don't have to leave their small town southern community, you know, to escape their homophobic families anymore. They can go and be religious e-boys on TikTok now.
Or Peter Thiel.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure, him too. And they're no longer having to sort of go and join a particularly monolithic gay culture, and so you're just going to see more and more of this, right? You will find hideous white supremacist neo-Nazi gays, and you'll find, you know, Marxist gays, and everything in between, and overlap, because that's how horseshoe theory works.
Totally.
They're actually the same. What else was happening today? While I was sick as well, I'm so sad I missed my favorite celebration of the year. Victims of International Communism Day.
Yeah, wonderful. I actually know lots of people who are still in like the right-leaning libertarian world, and I saw some of them post on like social media attending the Victims of Communism Foundation's Triumph of Liberty dinner and gala. This was on the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Oh.
Yeah.
What do you do at this gala? I can only imagine what kind of celebrations.
They had pieces of the Berlin Wall like in like glass or something. Like,
oh, can't you just buy that shit at like tourist shops?
It's literally worthless. Yeah. Like it's junk. Like
my goodness. Now I kind of want to get some and then like go and throw them into the window of this gala.
Yeah. But I looked more into the history, and I've actually been to one of their events a long time ago. They were really pushing themselves into the libertarian world and like student movement, and I had no idea who they were. But when you look into what they are, for one, they're funded by the U.S. government. Very libertarian, very conservative, you know.
I mean, the state should only fund things I personally agree with. That is the libertarian way.
But they were funded and passed by a unanimous Congress, which means both Dems and Republicans supported the creation of this foundation and like this day. And then it was passed by Bill Clinton in 1993. Wonderful.
I don't know. Are you a victim of international communism, Sam? Do you feel personally victimized by Regina Stalin?
I wish. I mean, at least I got a free house and that victimization.
I thought this was satire. Honestly, when I saw it, it reads like some sort of like
The Day?
Yeah, it reads like fucking like what was that like? What's the South Park creators did that like? America, fuck yeah. What is that?
I don't remember.
Whatever. It sort of reads like somebody doing satire anyway, and apparently it's not. It's just Bill Clinton pandering to the right in his usual bullshit triangulation, where it's like, how do I run to the right of the Democratic position on this? I don't know. Let's go do a bit of fucking red baiting in 1993. Yeah. Like, that was not the time to do red baiting. It was done.
You know, in D.C., because we went there last year, they have a like Statue of Liberty-esque thing for the victims of communism funded by tax dollars.
Sweet. Well, we're going to fund the victims of capitalism guillotine.
Yeah. We'll bedazzle it, and it'll have a bunch of rainbow flags, so it'll be gay and bedazzled.
I mean, because the counts on some of this stuff they use as well are hilarious.
Yeah.
It's like anybody who tripped and fell on a cobblestone in a quote unquote communist country anytime since 1945 is counted as a victim of communism.
Yep, all the famines, which only happened in communist countries, as we know, never happened in India or Ireland or anywhere else, or even China before communism. But also their definition of communism is super weird. Yeah, because there's only 5, according to them, in the whole world right now. Their definition is a dictatorship, or single-party dictatorship. That's it. So like Venezuela, they don't consider that, but they still critique it. So
I should hope not. It's not.
So it's like
really
Cuba, China, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam.
I wonder if there's any other victims in Vietnam that were maybe not victims of a communist regime. Lao. Yeah, or Lao.
The most like bombed country ever.
Yes,
it's gonna take like over 100 years to like clean it, if they even have the funding. Pretty wonderful.
Yeah, that's fucking spectacular. I did not know that was their official accounting.
Yeah, no,
I feel like the Vietnamese and Laotian sort of peasants who were bombed constantly might need to figure into that count somewhere, but it's not quite on the same side, is it? I don't think they're getting invites to the gala, are they?
Or the 1/3 of all North Koreans who died because of the Korean War.
They're not. No, they're not on the invite list, are they? Couldn't their invitations couldn't reach them because the evil authoritarians. I see.
But also, like you said, where's the victims of capitalism day? I mean, people are dying from insulin. That should count. I think we should do a tally, and I've seen YouTube videos where they do that, and it just like crushes the number because it's so much worse.
Yeah, and it is it's a bit of a silly game, but also given it 364 days a year as victims of capitalism day, the fact that some really bad shit happened in things like forced industrialization or civil wars that lasted, essentially very protracted civil wars or armed conflict and things like that. It's it's always fun that we pick the one boogeyman that might they might get some schmucks to like donate some money to your shitty foundation, your shitty gala dinner.
I mean, I've seen some of their speakers in the past, and they're all like Reaganites and like neocons and shit. Like,
the same embarrassing crew that has really brought us, peace and stability in the world.
Totally. And they kind of don't give a shit about like U.S. military playing a role. Like, don't ever critique that, because that's for good. It's for democracy and freedom. And speaking of democracy and freedom, the activists just won in Bolivia. And by activists, I mean right-wing opposition through a coup in Bolivia. So that's pretty fucking great.
So I think we've been sort of alluding to this a little bit in a slightly roundabout way, mostly about like our friends at Extinction Rebellion sucking on the issue of Bolivia. But now it happened. Evo Morales, at the time of recording, he is safely in Mexico, I believe. Having resigned at the point of a gun.
Pretty much. And it was pretty recently. It was Monday, and I remember like seeing it on like online, and pretty upset about that it happened, just because I feel like we all kind of knew it was coming, but I just didn't expect it to happen so soon.
Well, yeah, I think, we will sort of dig into the history of it, but I think that first blush reaction to this is, kind of hits you like whiplash in terms of like, if you've studied U.S. foreign policy, particularly U.S. intervention in Latin America, right? There's just this sort of laundry list you sort of rattle off, going back to like, God, the 30s, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm sure it stretches back further. At least my sort of working knowledge of it probably runs back to about the 30s. And you're just like coup after coup after coup, after funding militias, after funding right-wing guerrillas against, anybody left-wing, right, is going to get toppled, because the only unacceptable thing in American foreign policy is to have a left-wing government in South America. And you always think of them as these sort of quite dramatic events, but it's like, no, it's just such workaday bullshit for these people. It's just, they're just like, oh, yep, just topple another government, onwards to the next one.
And that's the thing. I've seen so many, like the mainstream media and, like, liberal, like, elites of, like, the U.S., their takes are just so bad. It's like they've never read a history book, like, literally. And they're expecting just, like, some, like, old, like, we just shoot the leader of, like, a foreign government and that's our coup. But the military doesn't stay stagnant. They adjusted, and they've led to, like, funneling money through, like, mercenary states. And now they utilize, like, the non-profit industrial complex and, like, think tanks and stuff, because it cuts off the track and most people aren't going to look at where the money is coming from anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine what it's like to be Noam Chomsky on a day like this.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, you dumb motherfuckers, I have told you over and over for about 50 years how this shit works. And it is a sort of classic cycle, right? I mean, so like, you see how the government sort of sets a pose.
Yeah.
The cuddly relationship between right-wing opposition in a country and essentially the U.S. apparatus of state, both sort of covert and not. And then how the media just loves lining up for this shit. They will repeat it. And then credulous sort of well-intentioned people will just sort of convince themselves. They don't even like need to be persuaded that actually this Evo Morales guy sounds, I heard there was something fishy about that election. Which is, these people just say this, right? You're like, what the fuck?
I've seen some people like post, and I'm just like, just reading their posts, I'm like, you clearly have no idea what you're talking about. Like, they just make statements, and you just look it up on Google, and you're like, that's just factually false. Like,
right?
Like one example is like, is the fraud, like the election fraud myth.
Oh yeah.
And
why don't we run through the timeline a little bit in terms of like,
so a month ago, there was the presidential election in Bolivia, and the opposition at that point already was like we're gonna be mad either way if Evo Morales wins.
Yeah.
And
so he's been in power for 2.5 consecutive terms, right?
Yeah,
and there was this referendum in 2016, I believe.
Yeah.
About whether to impose term limits on basically a 2-term limit, I believe, on sitting presidents. This was largely pushed by the opposition, who basically kept figuring out they couldn't beat him.
Yes.
Like, you have to remember, incredibly popular.
Yeah.
And had a base of support that the kind of neoliberal through center right in Bolivia does not have, and has never had. Workers, farmers, indigenous people.
Yes.
And to the extent that this referendum passed by a very, very narrow margin, there was a lot of sort of weird, dirty tricks involved.
Yeah.
And then it was overturned by the courts there.
Yeah, the Supreme Court overturned it. And one of the arguments the opposition is making is these people appointed are like Evo Morales' lackeys, like they're appointed by him. But if you do a simple search, you'll find out the whole Supreme Court is voted but on a non-partisan popular vote by the citizens. So it's more democratic than the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes.
So clearly, like, the people voted in, these people who were like, no, the term limit rule is unconstitutional, and their statement was it violated human rights. that whole part of the term limits, he's not breaking the law. It's completely legal according to the country. And if you're upset about that, that's fine, but it's not your country. Like,
if you're like, I wish, I wouldn't want us to do that here. It's like, yeah, fair enough. And you know, the stakes of this are, I can see why they feel very high. If you were a person who just basically wanted this person out of power, and I'm not even saying, you know, in the sort of, you know, any corrupt or malevolent way. I'm just saying, you know, you have a different set of politics, and you just, you know, there's some contest of ideas playing out. You want this guy out of power. Well, okay, yeah, that would make you super mad. But like, it's all sort of, to the extent that like American liberals repeating the idea that like, well, Morales just stacked the court with his lackeys, and they let him, you know, it's just this like racist tropes of fucking banana republics where they're just oh, this is just a tin pot dictatorship. It's like, no, this is a country with laws and an institution, its own set of norms. Like they executed their own norms. Like, whatever.
It's even crazier because where's the outrage at Germany? Angela Merkel's been in just as long, if not longer, than Evo Morales, and no one cares because she's from an ally state, and the media is never going to bring up that she's, I don't know, like fourth term. Like,
I mean, Germany's never had a problem with sort of strongman dictators or anything. They've always followed the rule of law.
Always.
So that happened. Yes. And then what did we get to next? So then
the election happened, and prior polling was showing that Evo was most likely going to win. And basically, the voting process in Bolivia, there's two sets of voting, and the mainstream media never mentions this. There's the quick count vote, which is for media coverage. It basically allows us to kind of like get a hypothesis of like what's the rates.
It's a little bit like the exit polling that is done in U.S. elections.
And then they start the like official polling, and the media's been framing this like, oh, the government cut off the other polling, but the other one's not the legal precedent for who wins. And also, they were like, oh, he's winning, and the outside districts, which are primarily rural farmers and indigenous and poor folk, we're going to go to Evo Morales. Also, that's his demographic. Like, they're the last ones to come in, which is pretty typical for, like, most left-wing leaders.
Well, that's actually, if you sort of looked at all the international election observers' guidelines about quick counts, is that they are, they're a way to basically not have unrest during the counting process, which can take a long time to do an official count. And got some of the ghouls that came out of the woodwork on this shit. So the process was basically that I think they basically had all the returns to the official count, so they stopped the quick count. They're like, no, it's fine. We're going to just do the real count now. Like, so it stopped at about like 80-ish%, where Morales was, I think, about like 8 or 9% ahead.
Yeah, it was only like,
if he's 10% ahead, it does not trigger a runoff. There would actually have to be another round of voting if he won by less than 10%. Lo and behold, then people get really mad about the quick count having stopped. They're like, oh, there's fraud going on. So what do? They go complete the quick count. So it all updates at once. They're like, okay, we had it. We just stopped updating because we were going to start updating the official counts. It comes out and Morales has won by like 11%. Which is, just to be clear, exactly what the polling had predicted. And then here's the worst part. You get a lot of like just the shittiest human beings on earth coming out with very elaborate statistical models. And they go like, there's no way he could have won because there was only 19.1% of the vote, and if it had distributed like this, basically anybody who's looked at this since, and like, I promise you, if you've done high school math, you can interrogate these results yourself. There's no special pleading required. These people were like fitting these insane like hyper parametric models, these things, and be like, look, if a comet passed by the Earth at this second, then he must have flipped these votes. Anyway, if you look at like simple linear prediction of like, if the votes were basically coming in at the same general proportions, it would only require that it was like the rural districts coming in last, which is exactly what is predicted in elections like this. Then he won. So the election, as far as anybody who's looked at it in detail since can tell, the election was sort of fine. Like, the polls showed it was going to be like this. It ended up like this.
And it gets even funnier because some people were like, oh, they just rigged the vote, which was like the same tactic we do for all countries, like Venezuela. They did it. It was basically a Venezuela 2.0. If anyone followed that.
One playbook.
But the DC Center for Economic and Policy Research basically did a whole like analysis of like all the polls and stuff, and basically showed like even if there was like some like mishaps, which happens in all elections. Like,
Yeah.
he still won. Like, they basically debunked this whole myth there was like election fraud. You can look it up. I'm not going to read the whole report here because I don't want to bore you. But
Right. And so a few more actors came into play very quickly during the analysis and the controversy here, right?
Yeah.
Because so basically what you have to look at is that there are certain factions in every election where when they lose, they are going to cry foul.
totally.
Just like, and if you live in a country that has elections, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You are not confused about this. I mean, think about all the Russiagate bullshit. Like, there's been 3-4 years of that now, of like people being like, "Oh, Russia did it."
Totally.
It's like, these are these people, right? Are basically starting to scream and yell, and appealing to the OAS, right? The Organization of American States, who had election observers in the country.
Yeah.
And do you remember what they were saying?
They basically were claiming, like, they didn't even have, like, the report came out very fast. Like, it was much earlier than anyone thought it was going to come, because Morales was like, oh, come and, like, check. And, like, basically published a report. I didn't really have anything definitive, and got debunked by, like, the Center for Economics and Policy Research.
Yeah.
So basically, they offered nothing.
The OAS is not a totally impartial organization. Although, to be clear, they didn't really say there was any election irregularities or fraud.
Yeah.
They simply sort of said, like, this is very concerning, and more, we should do recounts in these ways, and we should look at this. So they basically issued a sort of preliminary report based on the quick count. And this whole idea that there are these two election counts, and the media cycle in Bolivia was very confusing to everyone, I think, trying to get, the media would have been reporting that, like, there were inconsistencies in the quick count in such and such a district. And then the OAS were basically saying there have been allegations of irregularities in such and such a district. As far as I can tell, when their full report came out, there was sort of nothing. It's sort of a nothing burger. Like, there's kind of nothing in it.
And the OAS, just for background, is basically 60% of their funding from the U.S. government.
Yes.
And there was actually a WikiLeaks release in 2008 talking about the overthrow of Morales and either a coup or the death of him. So, like, no one's surprised. Like, if anyone's, like, done research, like, you'll know this was coming. Like, we can't allow anyone who claims to be socialist to have an effective economy. And Bolivia has the fastest growing economy now in Latin America.
Well, it did.
It did.
We'll see.
They just got universal health care. The poor's poverty was dropping. Indigenous man, it was like working class power in many respects.
Yeah. So, it has been official state policy of the U.S. to overthrow Morales, essentially. I mean, in terms of, we know this through disclosures. And like the Stratfor leaks, the Cablegate, a lot of work by WikiLeaks, essentially, and others. But, like, we've just been trying this under Obama as well. Keep in mind, under Bush, under Obama, and under Trump, it has been our stated goal to remove Morales from power.
Yeah, and
by this playbook.
Yeah, and a big thing is he nationalized all the gas and oil in many of the mines, and had not too long ago nationalized lithium mines, which Bolivia has one of the largest concentrations in the world. And lithium is how you power, like, batteries, which means electric cars.
Well, the Tesla thing was a little overblown.
No, I didn't mean Tesla.
So obviously, world battery market's huge.
Yeah.
But there was a slight misdirect in some of this, where people were showing pictures of the Tesla stock spiking last week.
Okay, I didn't see this.
Okay, so Tesla stock spiked by like $100 last week. But it was because they unexpectedly turned a giant profit. And for other reasons to do with the irrational bullshit of markets. Yeah. But, like, I do not believe they were involved in a grand conspiracy. No, and they do not source their lithium from...
and that wasn't my claim.
No, I know. But some other companies certainly were spiking on the day that Morales was basically deposed.
And one of the big things is that when they nationalized it, they were like, we're no longer becoming an extractive company or organized country where we're just going to send our resources for pennies to developed nations. We're going to start building the batteries and stuff to sell for, like, industrialization purposes in the country. And that's clearly a challenge to the capitalist hegemony of the West. But after this whole ordeal, like as many countries in Latin America do, the opposition basically protests and strikes and has a complete fucking meltdown like a 2-year-old child.
Well, there were protests, and then there was definitely some histrionic meltdown. But
Totally.
Let's just assume, once again, if you've ever seen an election, if you were, say, around in 2016 and saw Trump elected, you would have seen there were people out protesting.
Totally.
They were mad as hell about it. And so in Bolivia, it turns out when Morales won, there were some people who were mad as hell.
Yeah.
Some of them are really fucking shifty right-wing fascists, but not everyone. There's just some people who are just mad about losing an election.
Yes. So the opposition was basically just screaming about fraud and how if you basically point out the fraud is wrong, they just went to the term limit vote, which was overturned because the court appointed by people said it was not allowed. But Morales, being the evil authoritarian dictator, tried to make peace. So his first attempt was summoning the 4 political parties, having a dialogue table established for peace, and inviting all the international orgs, the Vatican, Pope Francis, the United Nations, the OAS, and any other actors who really wanted to help develop peace. And one of the opposition leaders was like, no, he's talking fucking crazy. Because why would you want to have peace? They want to overthrow him. So the protests keep going on. And I think the next day, he talks to some of the union leaders in the country because violence is kind of skyrocketing towards Evo Morales' party members and communities, the movement advancing socialism. And the unions were like, we need to end the violence. So being dictator he's like, okay, we'll have new elections. And the opposition are like, okay, but you can't run because they'll lose. They're not afraid of rigged elections. They just know they're going to lose again. People are going to be even more pissed and ready to fight for this movement that's helped the country's poorest and indigenous communities.
Right. There's this appeal to some weird sense of abstract ideals, and I feel like it's not just an American sport, but it definitely gets worse.
Totally.
In the U.S., I think we're, because there's this sort of really grand narrative about the Constitution, our beautiful norms. Folks, they're the best norms.
Yeah.
People sort of are appealing to this weird high-minded ideal. It just doesn't work like that. It turns out it's out and out warfare. There's a real contest of political ideas going on here between classes, essentially. These divide along class lines. And so, there's some real stakes in the shit, and people will win by any means.
Yeah.
It's not like there's the good, democratic, wonderful people on one side and the dirty, evil, authoritarian socialists. Nobody's there's no greater, higher principle being appealed to here. It's just trying to win.
Yeah, pretty much. And things just keep escalating. And this past Monday, the senior military and police leaders were basically saying, Evo Morales, step down, resign, which a lot of people have been taking as he just stepped down peacefully, which the media is portraying as, but no, when the military's resign, that's a threat. That's a bounty on your head. It's not as some peaceful, we just care about democracy and freedom. It's no, we're gonna overthrow you the peaceful way or the bad way. Right.
They did not. They were not saying that they would preserve order in the streets. They were saying that he had to resign.
Yes.
And this is, just to be clear, every other Latin American leftist leader who has said no when this happens is found shot in their is found shot in their palace, basically, or has their motorcade bombed.
And he did resign because he was I just want peace. I want the violence for my brothers and sisters and to stop being attacked. And we'll kind of go into more of the opposition after this, but it also included his vice president, Alvaro Linera. If I'm butchering any of Spanish, don't come for me. I don't speak Spanish.
Our pronunciation is going to be really bad through this entire segment.
And then the president of the Senate, who's actually, when the president and vice president stepped down, is supposed to be the new interim president. She also resigned. Her name is Adriana Salvatierra. And this week, actually, the head of the police also resigned, and more leaders have been forced into resigning.
It's always a good sign.
Yeah, which is totally normal. And to touch on why, like how grave the violence was, I think the moment really showed me how awful these opposition protesters were getting was the incident with Mayor Patricia Arce, who's one of the mayors of a city in Bolivia, and they basically kidnapped her, cut her hair, covered her in paint, and basically like screamed misogynistic words at her and like tormenting her, and basically forced her to sign a thing that she's saying she resigned. And you can find pictures.
Threatened to kill her.
Threatened to kill her, and they burned down the mayoral office, which like you would think you'd leave a building that represents your democracy and shit, but I guess not.
Unless you care.
Yeah, and you can look at the pictures. They're quite horrific. Like, I felt really bad. I don't even like politicians, like, forever, but, like, if you have any humanity, you can see this is, like, a vile. Like, no, thank you.
Well, yeah, certainly if your sort of comfortable liberal take on this is, well, you know, it's just about respecting norms. And I think you know, Morales, you know, well, he might have been good or might have been bad, but he violated electoral norms. It's like, well, certainly if your opposition are kidnapping, you know, popularly elected mayors and threatening to kill them unless they resign. I mean, I think that's maybe a bigger violation of norms than like using the courts.
Could you imagine if that happened to like SF's London Breed, where people just broke in and like
give up the plan, Sam?
Like, the police would just, like, shoot the protest, and that didn't even happen. Like, they had to rescue her. Like, luckily she got away. I don't know what's happening to her right now, but she got away. They've also been looting and burning down houses of party members. Evo Morales' sister's house was burnt down. Some actually had people inside still. And they actually looted the presidential palace, which was Evo Morales' residence. And it was really funny watching the video because it was a bunch of like young, like very light skinned, like bourgeois people with like iPhones, just like filming like the palace, like it's like no big deal. And then the main opposition leader, Luis Camacho, basically
he's a fun guy.
Basically storms in with like a Bible in hand and like kneels down, like prays in the palace, and it's like says, "Pachamama will never return to Bolivia. Bolivia belongs to Christ." And for all of you that don't know, Bolivia is the highest rate of indigenous people, and Pachamama's like the goddess. She's like the earth goddess or whatever. And this guy's like, no, we're gonna end that because we can't have indigenous people have their culture. We need to have a Catholic country, which is very common for coups as well, installing like Catholic right-wing leaders.
Well, and Luis Fernando Camacho is this guy who has never won an election ever.
No,
he's part of a sort of regional separatist movement, which has some weird ties to like Serbian, some Serbian like right-wing figures. Yeah. But they basically have the same politics as Franco of Spain, like the sort of phalangist, like Catholic fascism.
Yes.
And very openly. I mean, there's photos of them with their like doing Nazi salutes and doing shit like this, where they are like, you know, bringing the Bible in and tearing down indigenous symbols. And so this dude is probably going to be calling the shots at any moment in terms of
his background. Also, his family owned a lot of the mines and stuff, which were nationalized. So his family lost a bunch of wealth. They're not poor by any means. Yeah. But clearly his family is like out for it, like, which is classic class warfare. Like, this is what happens.
Yeah. And this guy has been certainly instigating a lot of racist violence in the country against indigenous people. His Twitter feed has become a sort of de facto voice of the Bolivian opposition. So he's the one who tweeted that the military have a warrant for Morales. Yeah. It's not really clear where that warrant came from, except he said they had one, and so they had one. But it's a very scary situation that this dude is as important as he had. He's, to be clear, never been elected to anything.
No.
He's just a guy.
And his like anti-indigenous thing just kind of becomes even more prominent, and you see like they're burning a I'm going to totally butcher this, but it's the Waipa flag, which is the indigenous flag of Bolivia. So there's two flags. There's the indigenous flag, which Evo Morales put into there because he made it a plurinational country because, like, there's indigenous people there as well. The soldiers who were part of the opposition were basically taking it off and cutting off the Waipa flag, and the opposition protesters were burning the flag.
Yes.
Which, like, says a lot because prior to Evo Morales, I went to the march in San Francisco, and one of the guys was from there, and he was like, before, like, if you were indigenous or, like, mixed, like, and a white person walked on the sidewalk, you had to get off it. It was pretty much like a two-class system. Yeah. And this is what the people want. Like...
Right. And so, yeah, there is just an entirely reactionary desire to return to that by some elements of the country, particularly the land-owning wealthy class, right? The mine owners and the landowners and the landlords, right? And they, like, this is their coup.
Yes.
With the full cooperation of the bits of the international community that love this shit.
Totally.
Argentina, Brazil, Bolsonaro, and the United States. Yes, Colombia, of course, and the United States.
And Israel. So some ties to Israel as well. But it got worse because everyone's like, oh, this is just peaceful, and is this going to end? No, they're now rounding up party members of Evo Morales' Socialist Party. They rounded up the president and the vice president of the election court, and it was by masked soldiers, which is, super scary.
Always a good sign. Our precious norms are being upheld finally.
And it's not even just elected leaders anymore. Now they're, like, literally rounding up like supporters of him in working class neighborhoods. They're gassing buildings. They're, like, arresting them. You could say about, like, pretty much any Latin America coup. They just do that. They just kill or, like, arrest
the usual suspects.
The suspects. It's quite terrifying to see that. And like you said, Luis Camacho tweeted about the military having to warn from Morales. So Morales went into hiding, as he should, because, like we don't want him to end up like a Gaddafi situation, like a bullet in the head or, like, arrested, because he will die. Like, if he will not get out alive.
These people do not regard his right to live as an important norm to uphold.
Yeah. But Mexico's left-wing presidential government basically were like, we will offer you and your, like, party people who are, like, being persecuted political asylum, and Morales accepted, as well as 20 other officials. So the issue was they took over the presidential plane, the military did, so Evo couldn't use that. So Mexico had to use one of their military planes, go to Bolivia, and then have to fly all the way to Paraguay because Ecuador and Bolivia were like, we won't give you airspace.
Yep.
So they had to fly over Brazil, and he just landed in Mexico today, but it's like, think of how crazy that is. Like, not only, like that's like, this is a coup. Like, you don't hunt down a person, like...
Right. If there's a sort of, essentially, if this is a normal transition of power, you would expect he would happily waltz out of the country in his own accord, right, as a private citizen.
Yeah.
This is not the case. And keep in mind, there is no allegation of criminal wrongdoing against this man.
Exactly.
Like, even let's say if you believe the wildest speculations about electoral irregularities, there's no allegation this guy's like a dirty dictator. He was the legitimately elected president, and just won another election.
Totally. And that wasn't even a narrative. Like, I pay pretty good attention to politics, and it wasn't until, like, the last few months where I started seeing, like, he's an authoritarian. Like, he was overall, like, pretty chill. Like, he endorsed Bernie Sanders. Like, this is the man who, like, people thought was going to bring Edward Snowden to Bolivia. Like, they brought down his plane in Spain. He gave a hammer and sickle cross to Pope Francis. Like...
Yeah, he's sort of like a pretty bombastic character on the world stage, but definitely, like, not even of the same kind as somebody like Chavez or like, I'm trying to think of even a comparison. Pretty mild. Like, enjoyed a lot of very popular support. His reforms were, like, pretty, like, reasonable reforms that you might implement. Some mild land reforms. There were some nationalizations going on, right? But, like, there was no purges. Like,
exactly. And if you're still not convinced it's a coup, today, Senator Gian and Sam, who's part of the opposition, her party did not run a candidate for president, self-proclaimed to be the interim president, despite majority of assembly members being absent from the vote, which is unconstitutional.
Goodness. Well, sure. I mean,
but we don't care about that.
But our precious norms.
Yeah.
But he might have had an influence over the court that decided that he was allowed to run again.
Yeah. No, it's gross. And I think the last major coup in Latin America was 2008, and that was Honduras, to my knowledge. At least when I was alive. I could be wrong.
Sounds about right. I mean,
because the other ones failed. There was the Venezuela and Nicaragua, but I'm technically Brazil, but that's a little different.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess Chavez was out of power for about 72 hours in early 2000s. Was that about 2002 or something?
But this is definitely a coup. It's not debatable. But it gets even more funny if you're not convinced about who is backing the opposition. Now, it's just not people in the country. It's not just the capitalists, right-wing loons like Luis that we talked about. But it's our good friend, her name's Janice Daza, but we're going to call her Janice because it's what we've been calling her.
She's a Janice. She really is.
Yeah, but not in the good place. Her and the Human Rights Foundation have been all over CNN talking about this and live tweeting it. And she tweeted, I have a few of her tweets. She said, "You can't call it nonviolence when MLK does it in the U.S. and a coup and we do it in Bolivia. What we need now is pro-Morales forces to stop attacking civilians for their peaceful protests." And that was her on CNN, which was shared by the Human Rights Foundation, which was founded by oligarchs in the Venezuelan opposition.
Yes, the Human Rights Foundation are a particularly nasty right-wing group. I mean, just international thugs.
And then she had another tweet where she tweeted when people who supported Morales came out and were protesting and for good reason. So they're clearly pissed that their government's being couped. She tweeted, #urgent. A big group of pro-Morales supporters is marching into the city of La Paz yelling, "Now, yes, civil war. We fear for our safety as these groups are armed with guns and declaring war. Evo must call on his supporters to stop violence, please." And it's I
think he did.
He did. He called nonviolence on both sides, but also you kicked him out for persecution.
They tried to arrest him.
And what do you expect the working class people who are pissed there's a coup that you helped initiate? They're not going to be oh, we're just going to accept it. They're not going back to, second-class citizens in their country.
Well, also, to draw it back to, I feel like part of the fetishization of Latin America by American liberals is to pretend that it's not that there's no comparison to be made with the U.S. political situation. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind all the sort of your American armchair warriors whose only dream would be a situation like this unfolding in America, where they could take to the streets, and all that time down at the gun range would finally let them go shoot the Antifa super soldiers who have stolen their democracy. Yeah, you have to imagine that this is really happening to people. If Trump doesn't, if Trump is impeached and does not step aside, can you imagine what the rhetoric will be and what the sorts of violence that people will be furiously masturbating to in this country?
Yeah.
I mean, so the idea that this is not a response that we understand or that has a complete parallel in this country.
Yeah. Well, this isn't our first coup. There's been many U.S. coups in the country. They know what happens. And
right.
Also, if you can watch tons of videos, and many of them are not armed. If you look at the march into La Paz, because most of the constituents of his supporters don't live in the cities. They live in the rural areas. There was, miles of, thousands, if not, millions of supporters with, the WIPA flag, indigenous women in, their indigenous garb, coming into the city because they want their voice heard.
Well, and to go fight the military, who is literally running armored cars through the streets right now.
And they're there's been deaths already towards them. The military's been dispensed onto the protesters who are now opposing the coup. And then she also, Janice tweeted when the new president of Bolivia was put in. She was like, Janine Áñez assumes presidency of Bolivia as indicated by the Constitution. She is the second female president in our history, and she swears to pacify the country and lead us to new elections. I am in tears.
Yeah,
that is
slay.
Yeah.
Slay queen, girl power, find me a girl boss. Holy shit.
She's disgusting.
And her background, I only briefly, but she's like just some like failed child scion of rich Bolivians who then went to, I think it was Kent State.
She went to Kent State, yeah.
And then, you know, as a new grad, is hired as a fellow, like an opposition fellow by the HRF, the Human Rights Foundation, and has just been doing this.
Her whole...
this is her job.
Her thesis was on overthrowing, like, authoritarian, like, governments in Latin America. Like, this is what she expertised in. And she was the one who's just been pushing any angle to critique the government because she's upset, because it's not the two-class bourgeois capitalist system that she misses. And
right, I mean, they're taking shit away from her and letting the poors have it. How dare they?
And it's been really gross because I've seen even leftists sharing her fucking takes.
Yeah.
Like, the leftist community in the U.S. are pretty bad when it comes to foreign policy, especially towards left-wing governments, because they're not pure, they're not bottom up, or whatever any of this means. They're authoritarian. It's like, I don't, like, all these vague words that they don't ever want to describe. Read some Chomsky, because you're a fucking moron.
Yeah, people are very quick to
defend
to defend it, but also to not maybe realize the degree to which, like, living in the belly of the beast, right, has shaped your thinking on foreign policy, right? It's sort of, it is easy to regard pretty much any non-US state actor as sort of just cartoonishly evil, if they are sort of deigned or designated as such by effectively the US, you know, instrument of state or the sort of organs of power here, right? So I understand why people arrive at these positions, but like just be a little less credulous, like scratch a little deeper, read a second newspaper, you know?
Like, even if you don't like Morales, like, don't be a fucking dipshit. Like, I've seen both like, oh, the other guy's a democratic socialist. No, he's not. He's a right-wing, like, I don't like using the word fascist, but like, he's pretty close.
He certainly pals around with the elements of the country that would like to see it return to a very stratified, like, class society, right?
Yeah.
So he was very quick to propose a lot of sort of austerity and neoliberal reforms and stuff.
But also this idea of like liking this person is just kind of silly, because like, you're never gonna have a person that perfectly matches your ideals. Like, the point of democracy is someone who most matches it. And like, if you truly care about the working class and like actual democracy in the country, you'll stick with Morales over like the right-wing opposition. Like, a lot of them were like, oh, if we don't think the right wing will take over. They just did. Like, their new president won through an unconstitutional voting to become the president because he got rid of the 3 steps to get to it. They all resigned. Like,
to be clear about like where the order of priorities, say, in terms of outrage, had Morales not won that election and not stepped down, then all of the sort of like, oh no, my precious norms, pearl clutching, could have applied.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. So that's one part. And then I guess the other part being like, the catchphrase people have been using sort of when they're like, no, I'm not owned. It's like tiny shrink and, you know, et cetera, right? When people are sort of having this demonstrated to them, they start going, well, you know, you're not Bolivian. So, and that is true. So it is up to the Bolivian people what they do. But this is not is not a political event free of interference by our government. This is literally the fact that the U.S. State Department has been meddling in this for 10 years.
Totally. That's the thing.
We do have some stake in it.
We do. Our taxpayer dollars and our government is executing coup after coup against countries that defy our unipolar hegemony. So we have a say in this. We don't want our money going to our countries. We're not saying that we're going to force Evo Morales onto the people. That's for the country to decide. But the opposition is being funneled money through some funnily libertarian groups, and groups like the National Endowment for Democracy. So if you're not familiar with them, pretty much any time the U.S. has a coup or like overthrows a government in a foreign country, now you have like the National Endowment for Democracy funneling money towards opposition groups like, or media sites or conservative think tanks. I've even seen it like in Cuba. They funneled money towards like rap groups to build discontent. They'll do anything to build discontent.
Try capitalism.
Yeah. And actually, The Intercept, Lee Fang did a really good article pointing out how libertarian groups, and especially the Atlas Network, which basically funnels money to like think tanks and groups all over the world, and they're all conservative, right wing, and a lot of like opposition leaders in like Venezuela and stuff have been connected, especially Brazil. Brazil's a very good example of that.
Yep.
But they also get money from the State Department, which
it's a huge amount of their funding.
Yeah,
right?
It's super funny because like these people who support it are like, I'm a libertarian, fuck the government, I don't want your money. Yeah, well, these groups are getting money from the NED and like the State Department.
And that's all we've got time for at the moment. We'll drop all those links in the episode description so you can keep on reading and keep the dream of a liberated Bolivia alive.
Yes. Yeah, and we'll give some links as well of people to follow who are covering on the ground so you can avoid the mainstream media BS. But until next time, guys, pay attention to Bolivia and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks. Bye.